Welcome back to the Dean Obeidallah Show. Right now, very happy to welcome to the show Fred Trump III, the grandson of Fred Trump, the patriarch of the Trump family real estate empire, also the nephew of Donald Trump, the former president. His wife, Lisa, and Fred are passionate supporters for the community of the intellectually and developmentally disabled. And he's author of the New York Times best-selling book, All in the Family, The Trumps and How We Got This Way. Fred, nice to meet you. Thanks for being on.
Great to be here, Dean. Thanks.
So let's first, we're going to talk the politics, the latter part, because your book's really not about politics. Your book is about your family.
Yeah.
And I want to start with your father, who died at a relatively young age, very young age for a dad in his 40s. And, you define him as a free spirit. And what
Mhm.
was that like for him in the Trump family that we know?
Yeah, Dad, just very quickly, if you don't mind, Dean, I
Sure.
wrote this book in part to honor my dad, who was a very caring and charismatic guy. My son, William, who's 25 now and has complex disabilities, but is the most courageous and inspirational person I know. But I couldn't tell those stories without talking about the Trump family. They're very complicated and sometimes cruel. And of course, we'll get to this, the lodestar, Donald,
Right.
who, unlike any other book, I've known Donald during his formative years, his school years, his business career. We were both in real estate. I never wanted to work for the family, never did, but I still was in the rough and tumble real estate world for 35 years and in his political career. And again, we'll get to that. But thank you for asking about Dad. I really do appreciate it. Dad was a free spirit. And he had such great friends from St. Paul's School out in Garden City to Lehigh University, where he graduated in 1960. I graduated in 1984, and my older son, Christopher, in 2019. So here's to Lehigh. I'll give Matt that Pennsylvania check. He was such a wonderful guy, had great friends, many of them who I knew. And in the book, it's some of the photos will have friends of his from Lehigh or St. Paul's. Uh, he he had a dream to become an airline pilot. That was his thing. He used to be a member of the flying club at Lehigh. And he became an airline pilot for TWA, flying 707s. I mean, back then, you were an astronaut and you were also an airline pilot, and those were incredible things. But it didn't cut mustard with my grandfather, who was an intensely driven guy in the real estate business, built more apartments than anyone in Brooklyn, second most in Queens. My father was supposed to be the heir apparent, the golden child. He didn't want that. And the interesting thing about that, Dean, is in 1985, my grandfather was honored at the Horatio Algiers Award, as was Governor Cuomo. And I spoke with Chris Cuomo 2 days ago about this. And my grandfather, during his speech, said, students come up to me and they ask me, what do you do? What drove you to become such a success? And my grandfather said, you got to find what you like and you got to pursue it and you have to find out everything about it. You have to love it. That was my father. My father loved to fly, but it wasn't good enough for my grandfather. And he was made to feel almost ashamed to be in that profession. And of course, Donald chimed in and called my father a glorified bus driver. What's tough about that is I mean, many reasons, but that was top among them. My father took to drinking
Mhm.
heavily, and he was an alcoholic, and that was the embarrassment of the family, which is interesting also because nearly everybody in my family drank, aunts and uncles. They just did. But my dad was the one that was pegged with that. And it crushed him. It crushed his soul. And I saw that firsthand. But the times I spent with my dad fishing, he was an avid fisherman. Again, a photo in the book that shows him with the second largest swordfish in 1968 out in Montauk. Still remember that day because he put all the swordfish meat in a fridge we had, and like an idiot 6-year-old, I saw a knob in there and I turned it off. All the swordfish spoiled.
Oh, my God.
Anyway, that didn't make the book, by the way,
Right.
but I'm telling you here first. Let me one last story about that, just
Mhm.
to tell you what type, and it's it's amazing to me, and people are real people that know my family, and I know a lot of them from decades ago. My father was in hospital a lot the last few years of his life. When I was a freshman in college, I was going on a middle semester for 3 weeks to Europe. And I was visiting him in Jamaica Hospital. He said, "Here's $100. Go to the camera store and buy a camera." I said, "Great. I need a camera. I'm going to Germany." I come back and he says, "There's a woman a few doors down. She's about 15 years old. She has terminal cancer. She really wants a camera. Go give her that camera." That's the way my dad was. And that story, I told it at my grandfather's. I was asked to eulogize my grandfather at Marble Collegiate Church in
Mhm.
1999. And I told that story. And that story resonates with everybody.
It says a lot about your father and that he wanted to do something different in the family business, and his life is made very difficult by he's primarily the grandfather, his father,
Yeah.
and Donald chimes in, but I guess the leadership came from the grandfather,
Yeah. It's
your
interesting.
grandfather, his father.
Right.
Right.
Many people have said, after reading this book, this is like a Succession story, the TV show. And I said, no, it really isn't, because in Succession, all three siblings wanted to take over the family. My father
Right.
didn't want that. He
Right.
gave Donald the clear path to take over the reins. And he somehow, just because he didn't want it, my grandfather wasn't accepting of that.
It's remarkable. There's something in your book I have to ask at the top. You have a quote. I'm half Sicilian, so I've memorized The Godfather. And in the book, it's you write two quotes. One, it's not personal, Sonny. It's strictly business. And you quote Michael Corleone from the Godfather film. Then you know a quote from the book of The Godfather. Mark Corleone says, "It's all personal, every bit of business." Share why you put those two in there.
Anybody who knows me, besides the fact that I'm a political junkie, I'm a Godfather junkie. My mom used to joke, honey, you're not going to get far in the business world by quoting The Odd Couple or Monty Python or The Godfather. To which I said eventually, Mom, I did okay.
Right.
Everything was transactional in the family. It was not a very loving environment. Now, I will take that mostly from my grandfather's upbringing. He lost his father when he was 10 years old. And that's actually a really interesting part of the book. Some of the stuff I didn't know about my great grandfather. He died from the Spanish flu, or what was called the Spanish flu. Flash forward to 2020. I'm not laughing. It's sort of just the ironical part
No,
of
I
it.
understand.
When Donald was president during the Spanish flu of its day. So my father was sent to work, much like a lot of 10-year-olds were in the early 1900s. But anyway, he was driven then, and that he had a demeanor about him. It very businesslike, not very emotional. You'd kiss him on the cheek, and that was it. But that being said, and this sort of translates to Donald also, and I'll tell this part of it first. There were two examples of when my grandfather actually acted like the grandfather I wanted, much like my mom's dad, who I don't write enough about. His nickname was Mike Clapp. He was just a super guy. He would call up, "Hey, how's school going?" But how's bowling going? That kind of thing. My grandfather
Right.
was Trump was never like that. But one time he took me to Forest Park Golf Course because I was starting to become a golfer. And we drove by the abandoned clubhouse and goes, "I used to caddy here when I was a teenager." And we get to the course. I mean, that was cool. We get to the
Right.
course. I, of course, pull out a driver. I'm 20 years old. I'm just going to swing for the fences. And of course, I sliced it off into the woods. He takes off his jacket, his tie, pulls out a 6 iron, right down the fairway. Another time, I didn't even know he ever played baseball. He said, "Come on, let's go have a catch outside." So there were those brief moments of humanity in my grandfather. Donald, too. Donald was the first person to put a golf club in my hand. And we shared a lot of great times playing golf. When I was a kid, he'd take me uh, to movies and just, hang out and stuff. And he had that caring side of him. but he also did horrific things to me and my family. So
Yeah, you go through in the book different things, and it's interesting that when you read in this book about the first your father and that family, the humanity of that, and also the challenges of drinking, and then the pressure in terms of your own family and your mom and what happened. But years ago, I talked to your sister Mary Trump about her book, the first book, and so much of there was a humanity to Donald Trump that in the both your book and her book that is missing in the coverage. And I don't like Donald at all. I frankly, I would say it's fair to say I despise him. But there's a humanity to him, and that a guy clearly either he's different with the family or he's shifted as a person. Like, and people evolve. What they were younger is not always what they are older, and that's the reality of the world. I'm chatting with Fred Trump about his new book, his New York Times bestseller, All in the Family, the Trumps, and how we got this way. So let's talk about your son William, who you mentioned has challenges. You and your wife have become activists, not just for him but for the community. Could you
yes.
share a little bit about him, because it's important, because you touch on Donald's reaction and causes some great strife between you, as I would understand.
Yeah. Thanks for asking about William also. William's now 25. He lives in a group home. He was born with the genetic mutation KCNQ2, and it caused hundreds of seizures a day. He spent the first 7 weeks after birth in neonatal intensive care units in 3 different hospitals. Not once did Donald or his brother or sisters come to visit or, frankly, even call to see how William was. Flash forward when Donald was elected, I knew that was my opportunity to take what I had been doing more on a local level to a national level. And I got in touch with my cousin Ivanka, who was very helpful in setting up our first meeting with a group called Equally Alive. They're fantastic, brilliant people who have been advocating on behalf of the disabled community for a long time. We met with Ben Carson, the head of Housing and Urban Development, because the housing issue for the disabled needs fixing. There's no one size fits all model for the disabled community. And throughout the few years, we met with Alex Azar and others, and it was good. It culminated in a meeting in the Oval Office with this group, Equally Alive, and Donald and Azar. And we were trying to pitch our ideas of how caregiver funding and training is important. And again, the housing issue, and also how there has to be a better way. We weren't there just to say, hey, throw a bunch of bucks at this thing and that'll fix the problem. Because Dean, you know as well as I, that doesn't fix problems. That causes more, in fact. So we're saying, look, prevention is the key to this issue. Prevention means more efficiencies, less cost, better care. The meeting ended. I was called back in, and Donald greeted me with his typical, hey, pal, how's it going? And we sat down for a minute, and he says, and I'll never forget it, those people, the costs, they should just die. I'm like, how do you respond to that? In fact, I didn't have a response other than, thanks for your time, thanks for setting this up, and I moved on. But flash forward a few years later, and I was talking with Donald about William, and again, William was 23 at the time. Donald still had never asked to meet William, never met William. He goes, your son doesn't recognize you. Let him die and move down to Florida. So my first reaction, other than, no, Donald, he does recognize me. I was going to sort of tag along a little joke like, oh, do you have a house to sell me down there? But when I got off the phone with him and thought about how one human being could say this about another human being is one thing. It's disgusting on its face. But to say that about your own grandnephew, who you never met. And again, Dean, you know this. He hates to be called a loser. Hates it. And I just look at him as the big loser in the fact that he didn't get to know his grandnephew, William. William inspires people. Anyone who knows him, he's nonverbal. He's in a wheelchair, needs assistance with everything. but he still has caregivers that have been with us for over 10 years. It's remarkable.
Mhm.
It's remarkable. And just to get back to the advocacy, it would have been great if Donald said, look, I know what you're going through. You don't need to ask me to move this forward. We're going to do it. Never got that phone call. So I was happy to take the initiative with my
Sure.
wife. Happy to do it. It would have been great if he got involved early on.
You mentioned in your book a very infamous incident in 2015 where Donald mocked Serge Kovaleski, the New York Times reporter. And that troubled you, obviously. It troubled all of us. And then Donald later goes, I wasn't making fun of him. Like, you, come on. Did you ever raise it? Did that ever come up with him at any time?
Sure, I mentioned it to him. And I also said this. What was disturbing, besides that, which, at the time I was running a golf outing every year at one of Donald's golf courses in Westchester for a local organization that William was part of since the Birth to Three program. I remember that day getting a call from the CEO saying, we need to cancel September's outing. We can't do it at a Trump outing. Nobody will want to go. I said, okay. And we raised a lot of money for this group. Happily. I was more into that than I was working in it. As a matter of fact, it was that important to me. What was disturbing also, and I still just hear the laughter of the people that were there that day, his crowd. I mean, what drives a person to act like that? Is it like, hey, it's not me, I feel good about myself, I'm not disabled, like that,
Right.
that reporter who's writing bad things about my guy. It's I used the word before with one of your colleagues, just gross.
Yeah,
Gross.
it is gross. So, I mean, did you actually raise it to him and say, Donald,
Yeah,
what are you doing?
I mentioned it to him one time. And there's never an answer. I didn't mean it, and that's the answer. To me, that's not an answer. That's
No. You mentioned that Donald hates being called a loser. You mentioned that in your book, and that one of the things he couldn't stand to lose, to him, loser was the worst word there was, and that you flagged that if he loses in 2024, that he's not going away, that he'll run again in 2028, assuming the legal system doesn't prevent him from doing that. That's something what I've said. I think these Republicans think he's going to go away if he loses. He's never going away. As long as he can run and speak, he's going to be leading this party.
And honestly, Dean, I don't think a Barry Goldwater moment is going to do that. Certainly, well, I could go on about Kevin McCarthy and that merry band of morons, Gates, and you know the names.
Sure.
I think it's got to be a wipeout of an election. I don't know if that's in the cards, but there's got to be something that, I'll use another Godfather term. There's got to be a war every 5 years or 10 years to clean out the bad blood. Now, I don't mean a war between Republicans and Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly believe in the two-party system, a healthy two-party system. The Republicans are a party that is morphed into something I don't think you and I recognize. There's got to be an internal battle between them to flush out what's in there right now. That's the only way I think we're going to get back to some normalcy. I mean, boy, do I look back at fond times of Ronald Reagan, who was the first election I ever voted in, and happily voted against Ronald Reagan, but there was nothing like this.
Look, I mean, internally, like in The Godfather, they're going to have to go to the mattresses in their own way to figure out how this is going to work out, because this can't continue. Look, it could continue. They can continue down this path, going further and further right as a populist party. We have them in Europe, but in Europe, they have numerous parties. It's not just two. That's what makes it dangerous, because if Democrats lose one election on the national level, they're in the White House, as opposed to if you have 6 or 7 parties viable in Europe, the other parties can bound together, and prevent that party from really getting the power they want. So we're in a much more dangerous place.
Oh,
so
there's no, and
go ahead.
Good on for the French and the British for holding the line.
Yeah, very much so. I'm talking about Fred Trump, about his new book. It's a New York Times bestseller, All in the Family, the Trumps and How We Got This Way. It's a very compelling, it's a quick read. It's first person, most of it, and you just read it very fast. So I recommend it to people. You can learn about the family, but politics, and a story that I guess on some level Succession is there, The Godfather is there. I can see all of that being there. You wrote about Donald's father, your grandfather, having dementia the last years of his
Yeah.
life. And that, do you see anything? I'm not asking you to be a doctor. Do you see anything in Donald now that reminds you of the grandfather during the times of dementia?
Donald said, "Oh, my father was tip top until the end." I can assure you that was not the case. Much like, his making noise about crowd size again. I was on a cable station on Thursday night. I said, "Guess what? I was sitting 2 rows behind him at the inauguration. I know what I saw.
Right.
I know what I saw in my grandfather. I know what I saw in Donald's older sister, my Aunt Marianne, who in the end, thank you for saying, I am not a doctor. I don't
Right.
pretend to be. I know the warning signs from both of my grandfathers, what it is. Donald's cousin, John Walters, had dementia. It runs in the family. I'm not happy about it because guess what? I worry about it myself. When it wears my glasses, on the top of my head now. I don't know, that may be Halfheimer's, but
Right.
it runs in the family. He he looks older, and I get it. I mean, I'm not saying anybody who is in that office looks different than when they come out, but the things he's spewing and the craziness, and he just can't stick to a message. And he used to be able to stick to a message. Now, like in North Carolina yesterday, he had one goal: talk about the economy in a state, again, he shouldn't be at. He shouldn't be spending millions of dollars. So he goes to play the old merry tunes of craziness. And you can tell his base, while still amped up and dangerous, you can see them kind of chilling out a little bit on this play. It may be on its way to being played out. Not immediately. It's going to get, they're going to be there for this election. There's no doubt about it. But I mean, you could see it in the faces of some people, like, why the hell am I here in Las Vegas? It's 110 degrees out, listening to, you know, sharks and electric batteries.
Yeah, it's different than it was. I mean, you knew him when he was younger, and it's not fair to compare someone when they're much younger
No,
in their 40s and
no.
50s to when
And I
they're
would never do that.
late 70s. But there's a distinction in the types of words he uses, where he goes. And look, it'll play. People are going to make that. That's part of the discussion. People are going to make a decision on how they're going to vote, and that might be part of it. And you're right about North Carolina. The new poll the day before, a Cook poll, all of a sudden, Vice President Harris is leading in a state that they thought they were going to win for sure, and so they're there. There was another
And
thing.
they'll take the governorship too, because that guy is a
Oh my
maniac.
God, he's horrible. Oh,
Yeah.
and he's a MAGA guy, and he won because of Donald Trump and MAGA.
Yeah.
And so that's where you're talking about. Maybe if the GOP loses enough, if MAGA loses enough, a GOP will reemerge. That's the big question people have. You wrote in the book, and I think it's so timely now because of the smears of Tim Walz for his service about Donald
Yeah.
Trump and bone spurs, and that
Right.
Donald Trump played baseball in school, and he was great, and he was scouted by the teams, and
Yeah,
all of
just
a
ask
sudden,
him.
right, right. And all of a sudden, he gets a doctor from a Dr. Larry Brownstein, and
Yeah.
that saying he's got bone spurs, and no one ever heard about it in the family before or after. What can you share about how that came to be?
Well, it's interesting because I was there. I was there, and people say, "Oh, you were 7 years old." I said, "Yeah, I was 7." I remember Martin Luther King being shot. I remember Bobby Kennedy's amazing talk that night to calm the country down by saying, "Hey, you're angry because a white man shot a black man. My brother was shot by a white man also." I mean, I just still remember that. So I remember my mom waking me up to see Neil Armstrong walk down
Wow.
to the face of the moon. So I may have been 7, but believe me, I remember everything. And the whole bone spurs thing was concocted by my grandfather. I mean, you could say brilliant. It got his son from a 1A to a 1Y. But then, of course, when the Nixon administration came under fire from having just basically minorities in the army, that they went to the lottery. And I was there that night watching it. In fact, his brother, Robert, his younger brother, got a number picked before Donald. But Donald was at Boston University at the time, so he got his deferment. Donald, I think, was 365 or something like that, which basically said, that he was in the clear. If you don't mind, Dean, I know we're probably running out of time, but just to put a little mark on this story. And again, I was there for that. I
Sure.
remember it took place in the library of my grandparents' house, which was a funny name because the only books in there were the white pages and the yellow pages. And maybe half your audience doesn't even know what the hell a white pages
No,
are.
I think they do. But what were you going to
But
say to add?
a few years later, I was at a school called the Q Forest School. I went from first to 12th grade. Donald actually got chucked out of there. And there was a young woman, probably 4 or 5 years older than me, selling bumper stickers, MIAPOW. And I asked her what that's for. Her father was MIA.
Oh,
So here I am with an uncle who had every advantage, sort of like Senator's son, Creedence Clearwater Revival.
yep.
And here's this woman, a young woman's father who was MIA. It again, I was probably, God, how old was I then? I was probably 11 or so. It's to this day. I remember when I was writing, thinking of that story, how unfair that period was, and how that young girl's life changed
True.
forever.
And I just had on 2 days ago Richard Ojeda, who's a former major in the U.S. Army, Democrat, and he brought up the point about Donald Trump and bone spurs, and he goes, "You wonder who went in his place."
Yeah.
And what had happened to that family? And it's so funny that you bring that up. And Richard was just on 2 days ago saying this. Last thing, what are you going to do? Are you getting active in the campaign in any way? Are you going to be involved in trying to advocate for, obviously you don't like Donald. Is it for Harris or are you just talking about the book and that's it? I'm just
No, no,
curious.
no, no. I have said, and in fact, the Harris campaign clipped my appearance on The View when I said I'm not just voting for Kamala Harris, I will campaign if I'm asked to. I've been in discussion. She is without question, and this is nothing. People say, "Oh, it's a hit job. You hate her." I don't hate my uncle. Again, we had lots of fun times
Mhm.
together. He's done horrific things to me. For me, it's all about policy over politics. And Kamala Harris's policies and the Harris administration are the policies I believe in. I believe she'll be a great advocate on behalf of people with disabilities. I look forward to helping out with that. Um, she is the line of defense right now, to be trite, to keeping our freedoms intact, because this Project 2025 that Donald will disavow, which is a bunch of nonsense, is just a dangerous dystopian view of what this country can become, and it can't become that.
Well, Fred, it was great meeting you again. Fred's new book, All in the Family, The Trumps and How We Got This Way. Bestseller, really good read. Great summer read. Got a few weeks left in the summer. Fred, it was great chatting. Maybe in the fall you'll come back on as we get closer to election day. Just talk about politics and see what's
I
going
would
on.
love to. I would love to. I'm a political junkie, so I dig it.
All right. Take care, Fred. Have a great day, my friend.
All right, Dean. Thanks.